Greetings and a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining Global Peace Studies for Sustainable Development in Africa, where we discuss pertinent issues of peace and sustainability around the world and across Africa. I'm George Mutalemwa, moderating this session on behalf of the Africa Peace and Development Network, MAMA. Our theme today is corruption, conformity, and the crisis of integrity, re-examining post-colonial leadership in Kwei Armah's The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. Our speaker is Dr. Lukong Stella Shulika. She's a scholar, a practitioner, and the founding director of Global Alliance for Intergenerational Peace Leadership based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Stella has also contributed to our first book that we published with Springer International. And it's a pleasure having you, Stella. And I'd like to welcome everybody here to join me in welcoming Stella Shulika.
Thank you, George. Thank you, George. Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
Okay, before I start, let me try to share my screen. Can we see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. So hello, everybody again. I'm not a literature student, but I've always been interested in literature. I remember reading the novel The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born when I was in high school. And I was intrigued by that novel. So recently I've been thinking a lot about, the continent, what is happening. And it's interesting that whenever I think about the continent, especially the challenges that we face, it takes me back to The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. So when George contacted me to do a presentation, I was a bit skeptical and shy because I remember the last presentation I did in front of an audience was in September. So I've not done that for a while. So I was a bit anxious. But here we are. So today I will be talking about, it's actually a conversation. It's more of a conversation, a discussion, not necessarily a paper, because this discussion touches on the realities that we face in our African society. It is quite challenging, but then they always say at the end of the tunnel, there is hope. So that's why I'm looking at corruption, conformity, and the crisis of integrity, where I re-examine post-colonial leadership in Armah's The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. And it's interesting, the spelling of The Beautiful Ones. When I looked at it, I was like, okay, that's another angle, which is interesting. So when we look at, or when we reflect on this novel, it takes me to that point of having a conversation where I try to pick each and everybody's brain about the realities of our continent. So what is happening in our continent? It's more than 60 years since we had independence. So what is happening? So when we look at Africa, we acknowledge the fact that it's been more than 60 years after independence, yet Africa continues to wrestle with the paradox of political freedom and the systemic lack of governance, or the failure of governance in our societies. So what began as the promise of self-determination in the 1950s, 60s, has in many places turned into what today we see as disillusionment. So this is a crisis that Armah so powerfully captures in his novel, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. Though he sets this novel in post-Nkrumah Ghana, the novel actually speaks to the broader African reality, that is the collapse of ethical governance and the troubling complicity of ordinary citizens. The unnamed protagonist in this novel is alienated because of his moral stance. He refuses to engage in bribery, only to be ridiculed for his honesty. So in Armah's world, integrity is punished while corruption becomes the norm. This story is not just about failed leaders. When we look at Armah's novel, it's not just about failed leadership. It's also about societies that continue to sustain this kind of leaders. And if we delve into the arena of political sciences, we'll realize that political sciences have long studied Africa's leadership deficit, but often they have overlooked the everyday complicity that allows corruption to thrive. Armah's work actually fills this gap by reminding us that leadership is relational. It reflects both the ruler and those who are ruled. So when we look at it from Cameroon to Equatorial Guinea, to Nigeria, to South Africa, the account of corruption and post-independent challenges remain very fresh in our society. And Armah's thesis actually remains painfully relevant in the African continent. His symbol of rot and decay is not just fictional, it is a metaphor of moral collapse in our continent today. So to better understand the weight of Armah's critique, it is important for us to revisit the moment of independence itself, the euphoria of freedom, and the speed at which that promise of liberation collapsed into distrust and systemic failure. So on the right-hand side of the slide, we see a celebratory declaration, Happy Independence Day. It actually evokes the memory and flags raised when we celebrate Independence Day. It evokes the anthems that we sing and the collective joy of liberation. However, on the other side, that's on the right-hand side of the slide, we face the realities of our society today captured in the hashtags such as end the wars, hashtag end the wars, hashtag no to corruption, hashtag no to Africa, hashtag Africa is bleeding, hashtag end SARS, hashtags fees must fall, hashtag justice for women, and so on. These are not just digital slogans, they are the voices of the continent still struggling to birth the freedom that it was promised. So when we look back at the moment of Africa's independence, what comes to mind? We actually recall a period of immense hope. Across the continent, flags were raised when we had our independence. Colonial anthems were replaced. The leaders proclaimed a new dawn. Citizens actually believed freedom would translate into dignity, into prosperity, and accountable governance. Yet within just a few years, this joy, this euphoria begins to fade in our faces. Military coup d'etats take over, authoritarian regimes, corruption, scandals replaced the promise of liberation. So the independence project that we actually hoped for at the time of liberation is no longer what we see in our society today. And that is not because Africa actually lacks a vision, but it is because of the structures of exploitation that we find in our society today. And Chinwe Achebe actually goes on to diagnose this problem with a brutal clarity in his book, The Trouble with Nigeria, where he writes, the trouble, I quote, the trouble with Nigeria is simply and squarely a failure of leadership. His words recapture the disillusionment of generation leaders who had promised to serve and become the very promise of the society that we hope for. But today they have become the obstacle of the societies that we hope for. They have abandoned that collective vision in favor of personal enrichment. And the result currently can you still hear me?
Yes.
Hello,
We can.
George? Okay.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. And the results we face currently is that of betrayal. However, this reality persists not only because of corruption itself, not only because of the elite in our society, but also because of the everyday complicity that we engage ourselves in. So in this slide, the enemy is not only the state house, the parliament, but the enemy is often within us, within ourselves, because we tend to promote the corruption in society. So this very tension, this very metaphor, this description that Armah engages in his novel is captured when he says the beautiful ones are not yet born. And we see the unnamed protagonist, who is simply referred to as the man. He refuses to participate in the bribery that is ongoing in society. He insists on living with integrity. And because of that, he is being shunned from the society. And when we look at it also, we see Frank Fanon, he actually anticipated what is happening in the African continent today. That is in his book, The Wretched of the Earth. He warned that the national bourgeoisie has nothing better to do than to take over from the Europeans. And that's what is happening. In as much as we continue to blame colonialism, it's been 60 years and we have been in power in 60 years. But what are we as Africans doing about that? So each of us, we are accountable in our own rights. So in other words, the colonial structure remains intact in Africa today, and only the skin color has actually changed. So when we fast forward to today, we can actually trace these patterns clearly, where in South Africa, we have witnessed the era of state capture. In Nigeria, we are witnessing the continuous corruption. In Cameroon, we are witnessing the continuous corruption. So it is an everyday reality in our society. So the challenge then is for us to break this cycle. So if leadership failure is one half of the story, as Armah actually portrays in his novel, public complicity is then another. So transformation in this case must be addressed from both ends, and not only from the point of the leaders actually corrupting our society. And this takes me now to the point where I think it is important that we better situate Armah's idea of or metaphor of disillusionment. So in his novel, he often reads, when we look at Armah's novel generally, it is often read in Ghana, but when we look at the themes, they go far beyond Ghana. Armah belongs to a broader intellectual tradition along figures like Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Woi Soyinka, who sought to hold the emerging African elite accountable to the ideas of anti-colonial struggle. So his vision exposes the tragic irony of independence. The transfer of power did not just bring radical break, but rather It was a replication of colonial authoritarianism and nepotism. So in Armah's intense portrayal, the new indigenous ruling class becomes a mirror, an image of the colonial administration it replaced. So looking at Armah's novel, we see there is a duality in character. We have the unnamed protagonist and we have the minister, Kamsong. Once the minister, who was once a trade unionist, a figure of potential liberation, becomes a corrupt minister in Ghana. He represents that bourgeoisie minister which Fanon talks about and warns us about. His trajectory from hope to corruption illustrates the broader betrayal of the nationalist dream. But Armah refuses to let us see Kumsong as a mere villain because he is also the product of the system deformed by logic of power that was inherited at colonialism. So this is to say that leadership failure is not just about personal greed. It is a systemic outcome enabled by a society that is willing to compromise its values as well. So disillusionment in the reading of Armah's work is not a Ghanaian story. It is an African story. And the symbolism of that, he uses metaphors such as wrath, field, and decay. So one of the most striking aspects of Armah's The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born is his relentless use of filth and decay as narrative texture. The novel's landscape is saturated with overflowing latrines, graffiti-covered walls, and the stench of refuse that permeates everyday life. I remember when I read this in high school, I was like, oh, this is gross. Because the descriptions, I wish we can all take time to read this particular novel. The description, the way he describes what is happening in society using this metaphor. After reading it, you might not want to eat, you know? So these metaphors that he uses to describe the everyday life, they are not just mere descriptions of poor sanitation. They are metaphors for society, for a society collapsing under the weight of its own failure. When a protagonist encounters a latrine marred with slogans like socialism, chop, make a chop, money sweet pass all, who born fool, or country broke, the graffiti functions as a public declaration of pessimism. These phrases mock ideals of collective responsibility and expose the stark reality, self-interest, whereby self-interest has become the dominant ethos. Rot in Armah's novel is more than a physical condition. And when we go deep into these analogies of Armah's novel, the symbolism of rot actually sustains the larger argument of this conversation, which is Africa's governance crisis is not only structural, but also moral. Leadership failure is real, but it cannot be disentangled from the collapse of public ethics. The novel shows us the filth in every way, not because drains are clogged, but because consciences are corroded. So if the overflowing latrines and the stench of decay symbolize the collapse of collective morality, Armah takes us a step further by asking what happens to individuals who resist this rot. The answer lies in the fate of his unnamed protagonist, a man whose integrity makes him not as a hero, but as an outcast in society that has normalized corruption. Yeah, we come to the question of moral integrity and societal alienation, where we examine the character of the protagonist. Armah's unnamed protagonist, simply called the man, embodies that psychological torment of living in an ethically immoral society where corruption has become the norm. His suffering is not caused by poverty, it is caused by his refusal to conform. He doesn't want to accept bribe. He doesn't want to rise up to positions that he doesn't deserve just because he knows somebody that is up there in that position. So by resisting bribe and refusing shortcuts, he marks himself as an anomaly. In a world where corruption is hegemonic, integrity itself becomes a deviance. That is when we look at the character of the protagonist. So this is why he is ridiculed. For his integrity, he is ridiculed by his colleagues at work. He is scorned by his friends and even doubted by his own wife, Oyo, who urges him to wake up and think about survival rather than abstract principles. For her and for many around them, refusing to eat when everyone else is eating is not only foolish but reckless, which means if we are practicing corruption, if everyone is practicing corruption to get up there, what is stopping you from doing that? So what should be celebrated as moral clarity becomes condemned as weakness in the character of the protagonist. This is a true tragedy in Armah's work, which he presents, and he enables society to understand that there is liability in being ethical. That is, if we look at the broader society of corruption, being ethical becomes a liability because everyone else is practicing corruption. So the protagonist's alienation highlights a deeper crisis in our society today. That crisis of that the crisis of an individual who becomes isolated of society simply because he is doing what is right. So those who resist are mocked as naive, just as the protagonist. Armah actually shows us that the most corrosive effect of systemic rot is not simply the act of corruption itself, but the way society elevates it into a moral code. In this case, we have Oyo's wife who is pushing him to be, we have the protagonist's wife who is pushing him to be corrupt. And this idea or this description actually echoes Bembe's banality of power, where he argues that citizens are not merely victims of oppression. They become trapped within its logic. They learn how to navigate it, endure it, and ultimately reproduce it. In Armah's novel, Oyo, the protagonist's wife, and others embody this trap. Survival requires complicity, and resistance breeds alienation. The man's solitude, the protagonist, is therefore not only personal, it is symbolic of the fate of anyone who tries to live ethically in a morally compromised world. Armah's warning in portraying the protagonist is actually clear in that the greatest danger is not just that corruption exists, but that integrity itself becomes unsustainable in such society. When corruption is normalized, moral resistance become an issue. Moral resistance become extinct from society. So the protagonist's isolation is more than a character study. It is a metaphor for condition of ethical individuals in post-colonial Africa. From the isolation of integrity in Armah's protagonist, I would like to now delve into the broader architecture of betrayal, which is a leadership failure in post-colonial Africa. So when we speak of leadership failure in post-colonial Africa, we are talking about a persistent crisis, one that is both ethical, one that is systematic, one that runs through most of our institutions on the continent. And that has become structurally embedded in the continent's governance fabric. At independence, when we go back to when we had independence, though some of us were not born by then, when we go back to when we had independence, the expectation was that the nationalist leaders, having fought for liberation, would usher in justice, self-determination, and the prosperity grounded in indigenous humanistic values. But instead of fulfilling this promise, post-independence Africa has been marked by authoritarianism, the weakening of institutions. And this failure is not just occasional, it is deep-rooted in our systems, and it is being reproduced generation after generation. Armah's capture of this betrayal in The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born is relational. The character of Joseph Comsom, transforms from a humble railway worker to a corrupt minister, embodies the tragic reality of liberation leaders who now have turned into predators. And this is not merely fiction, because across the continent, the story repeats itself. We have leaders who began as liberators transforming into authoritarianism. We have rulers like late Mugabe of Zimbabwe, a liberation fighter. We have Museveni in Uganda, a liberation fighter who's been there in power for God knows how long. We have Zuma in South Africa, a liberation fighter. Yet during his term, the whole aspect of state capture became an issue in South Africa. So these leaders, when we look at these leaders, they are the archetype of Comsom in our continent today. They are alive in contemporary politics. But then Fanon had actually anticipated this when he warned of the rise of the national bourgeoisies, whereby leaders who, instead of dismantling colonial exploitation, would simply inherit and replicate it. Jean-François Bayat also later explained this in his concept of the politics of the belly, portraying the African state as a site of elite consumption rather than public service. Within this paradigm, the state becomes patrimony, not a public trust. Also, Nicola van der Wel works further documents how this system diverts resources to maintain loyalty networks around the different states rather than genuine development. So it is corruption where the pockets are being fattened, the bellies are being fattened, where we have our leaders traveling abroad for medical treatment instead of developing their own communities, their own societies to ensure that they can deliver such services So then we find ourselves in a situation whereby genuine development become an elusive concept. And we see this clearly in South Africa, Jacob Zuma's state capture, where private networks hollowed out institutions. In Cameroon, where we have a leader that has been there for 43 years, an aging elite who is also planning for re-election come next month, October, when we hold the presidential elections. We also see it in Nigeria, where oil theft remains endemic, depriving citizens of billions in revenue. These examples illustrate that the leadership crisis is not limited to a few bad apples. It is structurally entrenched in our society and it has become normalized. However, we must still be careful not to overstate the structural aspect of this because the colonial institutions did indeed leave deep scars. And leadership agency, when we look at our society today, irrespective of what is happening, still matters. So the most visible symptom of the failure of our society today, as captured in Armah's novel, is corruption. When we look at our African today, we have challenges of illicit financial flow, which continue to drain Africa of tens of billions of dollars annually. And this is not just an economic problem, it is a moral one because it is perpetrated by the leaders who are there to enrich themselves, but also by the public who readily accepts what the leaders are doing in most cases. So when leaders loot public resources, they corrode the social contract and erode trust in the very idea of the state. Armah's fictional Kumsong, with his lavish lifestyle, is mirrored in real-world leaders whose excesses symbolize betrayal. The consequences are there because we have cases of persistent underdevelopment in our continent today. The United Nations Human Development Index, for example, consistently ranks most African states at the bottom with deficits in health, education, and livelihood. As Thandika Madawiri argued, development is ultimately political. It reflects leadership priorities. When resources are invested in patronage and self-enrichment instead of public goods, the result is stunted human development. End of quote by Thandika. So we also cannot ignore, given this, we cannot actually ignore the gender dimension when we look at Armah's novel. We cannot ignore the gender dimension of leadership failure. Why? Because we see the protagonist's wife, in which Armah's narrative reveals that she continually pushes her husband towards compromise. She sees integrity as impractical. This actually highlights how patriarchal expectations of masculinity, equating leadership with provision and material accumulation, fit into the culture of corruption itself. And it also goes to show that gender doesn't actually prevent corruption in any form or any shape. So leadership failure in post-colonial Africa, if we have to reflect on the trajectory that we have been on since the 1960s, It is a reminder to us that the choices that we make actually matter when we look at leadership in post-colonial Africa today. It is a reminder that ethical courage, accountability, and inclusive governance are possible in our society, irrespective of the challenges that we face in society today. However, when the leaders fail at the top, the question becomes, what do we as citizens do at the bottom? What do we achieve? What are we promoting as citizens at the bottom? So when we talk of corruption and governance failure in Africa, the focus is often, usually, on the political elite. But then as citizens, as a public, we also have a role to play. Many in society today rationalize corruption as a necessity. There is a popular phrase in Pidgin, chop, make a chop. That is, you eat and I will eat, which captures the ethos of leadership plunder in our society. So the complicity of us as citizens and the public shows up in many ways in our society. The petty bribes that we give, the silence in the face of abuse, and political fatalism in our society. So in Armah's Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, he dramatizes this with the protagonist who refuses to receive such bribe and yet is ridiculed by his own family, making integrity seems like something foolish and almost treacherous. Bembe, actually, when reflecting on post-colonial Africa, he says that where rulers and the ruled are bound in a shared moral economy of corruption, then society suffers. And in this case, we see a scenario where the middle class actually withdraws from what is happening in society. They withdraw into their private homes, into their private schools, gated communities. So it is a retreat from public responsibility. The key point here is this, that corruption is not just imposed from the above. When we look at the aspect of societal complacency, it goes to tell us that corruption is not just imposed from the above, it is co-produced through everyday silences, transactions, and rationalizations until it becomes a moral code. That is why solutions cannot stop at leadership change or institutional reforms. What is needed is a profound cultural and ethical reawakening, one that makes integrity not a lonely act of resistance, but a shared civic ethics. On the right of this slide, it is the cartoon image that portrays the incisive visual metaphor of systemic rot. It captures the hierarchy of exploitation with clarity, from desperate citizen at the bottom, offering a bribe, to the elite at the top, feasting on the spoils of that bribe. So each figure on this particular image leans on the one below, illustrating how corruption is not just vertical, but cyclical, sustained by silence, complicity, and survival. With this reality and this portrayal by Armah, it takes us to the question of, where are we heading to as Africans? So we ask the question, from the 1960s till now, what has Africa achieved? And where do we as Africans see ourselves moving forward? So when we look at it, I will argue that the crisis of leadership that we currently face is a crisis of values as well. So there is that disconnect between the bottom and top leaders, that is the public and the leaders. The ethical framework for leadership is broken. However, philosophies such as Ubuntu, with its emphasis on communal reciprocity and shared humanity, and Ujamaa, centering familiarhood and mutual responsibility, provide moral grounds that can actually service leadership, promote accountability, and collective well-being. That is the African leadership and the agency that we hope to build. And in Armah's novel, he further uses the metaphor of a mirror, not just as a provocation, but to insist that within us, there is a real enemy. A real enemy that enables the degradation of society. Are we the protagonists or are we Comson? We have scholars such as Decker who have demonstrated that corruption is not simply imposed from the above. It is co-produced. So the break in the cycle of corruption in Africa actually requires that we go beyond decolonialization. What Francis argued, and what Francis argued, he actually talks about the rituals of elections. So when we look at the rituals of elections, with the aim of building a leadership agency and ethical leadership in Africa, where do we cast our votes? What do we as individuals, as the public, what do we engage, what do we promote? So the call here is that citizens must not, as citizens, we must not be recipients of state actions, but we must be co-authors of the reality in our political society. That is the reality of change that we want in our society. So moving ahead, I will argue that the challenge is not simply to remove corrupt leaders, but to nurture a conscious, ethically grounded public, so that the birth of the beautiful ones would depend not on the charisma of a single savior, but on each and every one of us. So rounding up with this presentation, there is a story of this university graduate in Cameroon. So I'll use the story to conclude with my discussion. So there is a story of this university graduate in Cameroon, in Yaoundé. Her name is Muna. So Muna sits behind her small roadside kiosk, selling roasted granuts, airtime, and instant coffee. She is a graduate from the University of Buea with a degree in English Modern Letters. While in university, she had imagined her life in front of her, a future of being a teacher or of being a teacher or a diplomat. Yet she's been graduated from university 3 years. And since graduation, there's been no job. To a point where she had to take the initiative of starting a small business by herself. Her story is not one of personal failure, but one of a system that is not working. She looks around, she sees her friends with lower grades, just like Kumsong in Armah's novel, who now hold positions in the ministries, which they secured through godfathers and envelopes discreetly exchanged. Muna's unwillingness to bend the rules in order to get a job put her in a position where she is viewed differently at her kiosk where she sells her cigarettes, the airtime, the peanuts. Taxi drivers stop there from time to time and they would lament about the fuel prices. Young men will complain about the concours, that is the public examinations that are being rigged in the country, or the examinations that you have to pay in order to pass. A civil servant once uttered to her, "Mafi, Cameroon is like this. If you no spoil small, you go die poor." Translating to, "My daughter, this is how Cameroon is. If you don't engage in the corruption, if you don't rub shoulders, if you don't rub the pockets, then you're going to die poor." However, Muna, being the person that she is, knowing what she wants out of life, she takes her time. In the evenings, she will read her books. And one of the books that she actually reads is The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, as well as Decolonizing the Mind. As she reads, she underlines passages of resistance. The cures, mocked by some as proof of wasted education, becomes for her an act of defiance. She refuses to chop bribe. She frames her modest trait as honesty in practice. If the beautiful ones are not yet born, she reflects, then maybe they are still in pregnancy. Maybe we carry them in our bellies now. So one evening, while serving coffee to school teachers at her kiosk, the school teacher sounded frustrated by unpaid salaries. She whispered to them, "Now we go change this country. One kiosk of honesty, one classroom of truth, one refusal to bribe, it go grow." Translating to, we are going to change the country. With one kiosk of honesty, like the one she has, one classroom of truth where you teach the children, you teach the people what is right, and you refuse to partake in the bribe, be it taking or giving bribe, then the change we seek is actually going to happen. With her saying this, they actually laughed, some indifferently, others with fragile hope. Yet for Muna, her kiosk remained more than just a kiosk. It was a seed, a reminder that even in poisoned soil, new life might still take root. So in the end, Armah's vision, as portrayed in his novel, is not that without hope. The beautiful ones are yet to be born, as he rightly puts in his novel. And these beautiful ones can only be born in the everyday acts of courage, of integrity, of refusal to participate in complicity. Across the continent, our African continent, today we see several examples of post-colonial states that have gradually carved out their paths of transformation, demonstrating that corruption and decay are not Africa's inevitable destiny. We have Botswana, for example. Botswana is often celebrated as one of Africa's most enduring success stories. Since independence, it has maintained relative practical and political stability, low levels of corruption, and prudent management of its diamond wealth. Unlike many of its peers, Botswana avoided the resource curse by investing revenues in infrastructure, education, health, and making it one of the continent's strongest democracy. We also have Seychelles and Mauritius that stand out. Both countries are small island nations, but then they stand out irrespective of the limited resources that they have. Then we have Ghana, where the novelist Armah actually comes from. Ghana, despite its challenges, has consolidated multi-party democracy. Ghana has achieved transfers of power and fostered a vibrant civil society. Its democratic resilience shows that setbacks do not erase long-term progress. And then we also have the case of Cape Verde. It also offers a story of transformation. But in all, what I'm saying is these examples, they remind us that the future Armah feared is not the only future that is possible for the African continent, because transformation is neither quick nor perfect, but it is real. It is a gradual process. And what unites these cases is not the absence of challenges either, but the presence of strong institutions, political will, civic participation, and a culture that increasingly values accountability over complexity. So at the end of it all, I would say Armah's novel, to conclude, forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth in our society. And until we face the enemy within us, in our systems, and within us as individuals, the ethical failure we ourselves tolerate, the conditions for the birth of the beautiful ones will remain out of our reach. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much indeed, Lukong, Stella, for this excellent presentation. You have taken us through a number of great ideas and thinkers. We are so grateful about that. And I think it's time we read again these novels, because they are treasures of wisdom that we can always tap into. So I thank you so much for this very clear and logical, important presentation. I would like now to ask members here to ask questions or make comments. And if you'd like to start, you can always just raise your hand. You can also put your question in chat and we'll read it out. And so who would like to begin? You have, yes, Janet, you're welcome.
Thank you, George. And I'm so grateful to you, Lukong, for this presentation, because you so beautifully really touch all of us, Africans, and also, you know, other countries that are like ours, US, succumbing to corruption and authoritarianism that's bold. I'm actually writing about the women's agenda for women, peace and security, 1325. And people say, why did it fail? Well, because governments sometimes won't take it up, but also governments don't have the capacities to take up something that comes from the UN down. That is an amazing ethical sort of like claim, asserting an ethical claim. And your description of the kiosk in the classroom is, exactly what we're thinking about as I'm a peace educator. And so thank you for these profound examples. And I think Mama George and all of us here is an example of a kind of kiosk, a kind of classroom for us to, but it's not a didactic classroom. It's a place of exchange so we can learn from each other and well, what can I say? I'm just wowed and so grateful for this clear, profound call for each of us individuals to participate in making a difference. You empowered us all. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for my long
Janet.
talk.
Thank you. Much appreciated. You mentioned Agenda 1325. When I did my PhD, my case study was Liberia. I explored the role of women in Liberia's peace-building architecture, and I had to go on ground to work with the women. I didn't just go to collect data. I was there to engage them, to understand how they engage their different activities. And one of the recommendations I came up with after my study was the need for a bottom-bottom approach. Why? Because most of the women in the rural area, they had heard about 1325, Agenda 1325. However, all the activities around that agenda, the implementation, it happens in the city, out of their reach. So at the end of my studies, I recommended the need for a bottom-bottom approach. How do we empower these women with what they are already doing, but also engaging them in these agendas that we actually come up with, we frame for their sake, yet it doesn't reach them down at the bottom.
Respond, because, oh God, can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
May I respond? Because that's exactly what, well, I'm writing with people in India, and they're, academics, but they really have been working from the grassroots, and they're trying to explain why 1325 has failed to be put into well, you could say force, but I didn't really like that word, put into practice. Why hasn't it been taken up as an ethical dimension? And so, yeah, that's, of course, now from national action plans, they're going to local action plans. And I'm trying to imagine like a sister groups. Did you see in Liberia the there are so many rural women's groups working together, working themselves. Did you see some kind of synergistic action between these, I'll call them sister groups? Or
Yes, actually in Liberia, I did see not that much, but I did, especially in the rural areas, the Bong and other county that I went to. But then in one of the counties, both groups came together to participate in my focus group discussion. And together they talked about the activities that they are involved in. And at the national level, one of the women's group that I engaged, told me they work with some of the women in the rural areas. So that was particularly interesting because most often, in as much as we aim for one goal, one purpose, which is the voices of women, the participation of women in society, in contributing to the strategic plans and developments that we have in place. What I find interesting is most often those at the top of the society, they remain there, and those at the bottom are at the bottom. But then in Liberia, it was interesting to know that organizations in the city actually collaborate with those in the rural areas.
Yeah, yeah. That's the case with these women in India too, that they're academics and they have, either they're professors or NGO activists or publication activists, and they're trying to be the bridge. That's what you're saying is needed, that it's not just the women to women, but George and everyone here, it reminded me of the problem of the African Union. When I started to follow it, it's following the UN, agenda, but it seems to be floating above the continent, floating from above the governments and the real action and the grassroots. Do you have any thoughts about that? And then I'll retreat. It's a question for all of us, I
About
guess.
that? Let
What?
me think about that, yes. Let me think
Yes.
about that, yes. I might speak
Yes.
to it in the course of
Thank you.
answering
Thank
the
you.
other questions. Thank you,
Yes.
Janet.
Thank you so much. Very wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Right. Ngala Beatrice, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kongala Beatrice. I'm from Cameroon. And I think I can contribute because I heard Cameroon like many times. And okay, I have two reactions. First, I want to say my country, I would say it's a hegemony. How do you even become someone with moral rectitude here? So the first thing I know of someone who recently confronted the boss like, okay, we were asked to be working in the Northwest region. You have decided that we should move to Yaoundé. My family is in Bamenda. Can you just give me every month? Can you give me, or every 2 weeks, give me 1 weekend to go and meet my family? Because it's kind of draining for me. And the boss was like, so when you stay here, they don't pay you? Say, no, sir. It's not about money, because if it's about money, I know exactly where I would have been working to have money. But if you say that it's about money, no. So this guy was like, okay, you can go. And he left, came to Bamenda. And a few weeks later, the boss wrote to his own hierarchy. And he's now sent to the hard to reach or the red zone of the Anglophone crisis. This guy has been there, and every day they are sitting with the separatist fighters. Every day they're shooting and all. He risks his life. He risks his family. Now these guys are coming and attacking his wife and children at night because he's a military man. So how in this case you want to really still be that upright citizen? Do you still want to keep your moral values? For some reason, I think it's difficult, because if he knew like this was going to be the consequences, I think for some reason he would have just shut his mouth and then sat quiet to protect himself and his family. So that is where he is. How do we navigate this? I really want to be the good person. I want to keep my moral rectitude. But where am I? Where am I going to end? Okay. That's a question. Maybe someone will help me answer that. And the second thing is about, I want to react to the grassroots women and peace building. So my thesis master's thesis was on women and women's traditional secret society and peace building. So I took the case of the Northwest region of Cameroon, and we have many women traditional secret societies here. So, and it's like everybody is surprised about this. We have been talking about grassroots women, but these women back then in the 90s, we had these Takumbeng women who are one of the women's secret societies who fought or who were there to support the opposition leader. And for some reason, where they participated, they did their own thing, and then the war came to an end, or the upheaval stopped because they intervened. So I am saying we kind of, we are talking about the UNSCR 1325, 1325. So we do this, we talk about women, grassroots peace building, but we forget to know that these are the real people we should get to. We talk about these literate women. They claim that they are reaching down there. They don't reach there. And from Jenna was asking whether in Liberia, they kind of have a synergy. During my research, I realized that, well, I was kind of proposing to them, because I took 3 different communities, can you people kind of form some kind of partnership or synergy to work together from 3 different communities? And I was told, Ngumba, not the cross water. Meaning, like, I don't know what Ngumba is in English, but it's like, okay, this part, like, we cannot partner with other villages because they have their different rules. So partnership, so maybe, I don't know whether it works. Doc, maybe you can clarify me. It worked in Liberia, so you can help me with how I can help also to help these women come together. But what I got from the 3 different communities is like, we cannot work in synergy. We cannot even partner because we don't see each other. Yeah, those are the things I wanted to react on. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. Josh, do we take another question before I respond?
We can take one. I can see that Yao Mason is here. So please, you're welcome, Yao.
Thank you very much, George. Thank you for this brilliant presentation. Actually, I just wanted to add up to the previous speaker from Cameroon. You know, when you are from Togo and then they're talking about Cameroon, or they're talking about Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, or, you know, all those Francophone countries, you know, you just like, it's like life is just impossible there, you know. As we're talking now, all those countries, about 15 countries in Africa, the central bank is the money, economic, the power is centered in France. As we are talking now, we are not talking about the past. We are not talking about the colonial time. Now, today, the economic of all those countries is managed in France, you know, which caused a whole frustration in the countries and everything that is happening. Sometimes you just feel so tired and so frustrated. You wonder, like, how at all can we get out of this? You know, you gave the example of Cameroon with Paul Biya, who is almost 100 years old, you know, and still running. And we can also say it ahead of time. Maybe the Cameroonian here can confirm he has won already. Nobody is voting. He does not even counting on the vote of the people to win. You know, those are not any secret anymore. The average Cameroonian can do anything. You can show the integrity. Whatever you do nothing unless you are ready to die. And they don't care. Life goes on. You know. It's not it's the example of Cameroon, but it's the same thing in Togo, in Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast, for instance, Ouattara, he came to power through war. That was back in 2010, 2011. Those who followed, they can remember. It took a war because the previous president who was there, Gbagbo, he was not ready to give up. And they fought a war for so many months until Gbagbo was captured, sent to the criminal court, and then Ouattara took over. He took over, he's doing exactly exactly what the previous one was doing. Now he has already done his 2 terms. He has done a third one, and he's now running for a fourth one. And then we are all watching. Africa, the whole of Africa is watching. Everybody is just watching. Nothing is going to happen if you want. It's like the situation is so helpless. And when you're African and you are listening to things like this, you really wish you can just ask yourself, well, what can I do now? What else? You are just a citizen, you are born in the system like this, you grow up to see that this is how the system is working. You like, you don't like, it is like the situation in the book of The Beautiful One Are Not Yet Born. If you try to show integrity, I won't do that, I want to keep it, you will be the most ridiculous of all. It's happening at the universities, in schools, every aspect of life. That's how it is. It makes it so helpless. It's like talking about independence especially in the Francophone countries. It's just like deceiving yourself. We are just fooling ourselves by talking independence, because nothing is independent. Nothing shows independent in those countries because the people are so helpless and everything is just a mess. So I just wanted to add to what the Cameroonian has said, that those examples are plenty everywhere. Plenty is known examples of all the Francophone countries. And as you are speaking, you say that all the examples that you've mentioned, Botswana and all those, you won't mention one single Francophone country. Nothing. It doesn't exist on the list. So can we actually, is it true? Because that's how I see it, that we are just deceiving ourselves by speaking of independence. Do you also see it like that? That would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mesa. Hey, I'm on a hot spot here. I don't even know where to start. Okay, let me start with Beatrice's question, where she asks, how do we navigate the moral rectitude? Given the case of the colleague who is in the conflict region and the family is being harassed. It's quite difficult to answer that question, especially when we look at some of our societies, Cameroon being one. I, as a Cameroonian as well, it is quite challenging. Indeed, we understand what is required of us as a people, but at the same time, we live in a society where, say, whistleblowers, for example, they are viewed same way the protagonist was portrayed in Armah's work. So it becomes a real challenge how to navigate that. If I say I have an answer to that, then I am lying. I actually don't have an answer to that. That is a difficult one. I can't explain because I have been in that situation. I have witnessed what is happening back home. And let me give a story of what happened. Once upon a time, that was 2019, visiting home, the conflict was already ongoing and heading to the Northwest region, the heart of the conflict. In the bus, hey, Cameroon government, don't come for me anyway. Yeah, in the bus. So in the bus heading to the village, I remember we were stopped by the law enforcement, those who said they claim to do controls. So the essence was to, check if we had IDs. And unfortunately, I didn't have my ID then. I had gone home with the intention of, I had actually made my ID card, identity card, before traveling. So going back home, my intention was I was going to collect my identity card. So traveling to my destination, we were stopped and the law enforcement, he came through into the vehicle, checked the IDs, checked. And when he got to me, I didn't, but I had my passport and I was like, Here is it. So he took my passport, held on to my passport. Some in the vehicle had already, stepped out and given something. They actually greased the palms so that he could let them go. And he told me my passport is not an identity. And I'm like, but this passport is issued by the Cameroonian government. And that's an identification document. So he held on to my passport for like almost 30 minutes, getting to an hour. And I said, I'm not going to budge, I'm not going to bribe. I'm going to sit in this vehicle. And I told the driver, we'll go sleep here. Meaning, driver, we are going to sleep here today. This vehicle is not moving. And to my surprise, the young people in the vehicle, a few young people in the vehicle, they were like, sister, just give him what he needs. Let's go. Just give him what he needs. Let's go. And I'm like, I'm not giving anything. So we sat there for almost an hour. Finally, he came, he gave my passport and told me, you're too stubborn. And I told him, according to the laws of this country, if you actually know the laws, upon entering the country as a citizen, I have up to 90 days to make a new, to go get an ID card. And I've just been in for less than 3 days. So go back into the law. I know the laws do exist. They might not be implemented, but the laws do exist. So finally, when he gave my passport and we're about heading our way, some of the elderly ones in the vehicle, they were like, oh, my daughter, well done. It's good you stood up to these people. The corruption in this country is too much. But then it got me thinking, I do understand the country is corrupt. But if in a situation like that, we say youth are the future of today, or is it tomorrow, the leaders of today and tomorrow. But if in a situation like that, the young people are the ones pushing me to give a bribe so that we can be on our way, then what kind of society are we building? So I don't know if that answers the question of moral rectitude, but I just thought I should share the story. Then with regards to women creating synergies and working together, the challenge is when we look at some of our societies. In Liberia, I saw some women groups, they do that, they work together. But then if I have to go back to my context, which is Cameroon, even here in South Africa, we have a lot of women groups working together, rural and urban. And if I have to go back to the context of Cameroon, especially the Northwest region, we come from a region where we have different customs and traditions, which, though good at times, those customs and traditions become the problem why the society doesn't really progress. Because, for example, the Gumba saying they cannot work with the Takumbens, for example, might be simply because there are customs and traditions that they follow that do not really rhyme or match with each other, and they might be viewed as going against the law. So that's one of the challenges that I think in researching women, especially at the rural areas, we should also delve deeper into this customs and traditions, and see how these customs and traditions can be navigated to ensure that as women, we work together irrespective of the limitations that we might have. And Beatrice, I think we can actually also work together. I'm currently working on a project where I'm looking at the Takumbem women in Cameroon, as well as other women groups around the African continent. So I'm looking at feminist peace building, but through the lens of intergenerational leadership. How do we pass on the skills and the knowledge we have as elders to the young women coming up behind us, to the young ones also trying to ensure that they contribute to peace and stability in our society. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yes, that is it. And Mesan, the question you asked, honestly, I have no idea. Truth is, when we look at the Francophone countries, there is a lot of division in the Francophone countries, to a point that maybe the change we hope for in our Francophone countries will be in a generation yet to come. Maybe it will manifest with the beautiful ones that are yet to be born. I don't know, but yeah, it's really a challenging situation. There is that lack of unity. Or maybe when we take that initiative to disassociate ourselves from the godfather up there, that is France, then we might be able to do what is right for our people and our societies. Yeah.
But you see, that's what, for instance, the three countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, are trying to do now to dissociate themselves from France. And you see what's happening. The same countries, Ivory Coast is against them, Benin is against them, Nigeria is against them. They have mobilized other African countries to destabilize them, sort of like it's become so difficult. If not for the support of Burkina Faso and Mali, then the other African countries like Nigeria, Benin, Ghana, they would have gone to war against Niger. They would have started a war against Niger because of the coup d'etat they did. Other African countries who are neighbors are ready to go to fight a war against their fellow country, their fellow. Is that not, the whole thing looks like it's so desperate. There's no way out. People are trying, people are fighting, because the former president of Niger, for instance, Mohamed Bazoum, he made it clearly that he's powerless in front of the situation, what is happening in the country. The country has been divided, almost taken fully by terrorists. And the president, he said, our army doesn't have the capacity to challenge them. And you are the president of the country, So, meaning that what? The terrorists are free to do whatever they want in the country. It's become so desperate. That's why then he was overthrown. And then now they come up with the narrative of democracy. No, they don't have the right to overthrow the rightfully elected president. So they should retain him. And that is the motive they are going to use to wage a war against them. The whole thing is so desperate. It's like, for me, that's how I think it. Think about independence, especially in the Francophone countries, is just deceiving yourself. There's nothing like that, and which make the whole environment, every aspect of life, so difficult. Right now, you'll be talking and say, okay, I hope the Cameroonian government will not come for me. You are not even free to talk or to anything. You feel threatened everywhere you are. Every aspect of life, you feel threatened. Well, thank you for your answer, though.
Thank you. That is right. It is a frustrating situation, but then I will say, you see, transformation is not something that happens in one day. I believe transformation will come. We might not be around to see that transformation, but it is a gradual process. It comes with challenges. If we as Africans can sit and we talk about Agenda 2063, most of us might not even be alive by then. But then there is that hope that the beautiful ones will be born by then to ensure this transformation actually takes place.
The book was written in
1968,
we were in the stomachs by then. The beautiful one. We are now born. And you see that the disillusion.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard, and then Evelyn. Richard, you're welcome.
And thank you. Good afternoon to you all. I'm speaking from Ghana. Our network is an academic network. That is, we analyze or we study and then try to bring up peace. Try to know where we can get peace or how peace can be made. So I think when we take things that are happening in countries or in our continent or globally, so sentimental, then we'll be troubling our own self, or we'll be a bit trouble. Maybe if you have a pressure, it will even go higher. I know that sectors of government are systems that are on its own. So realize that a sector that is supposed to construct road has its own mechanism to do that. Anybody outside coming into let's say, oh, I want to build this road becomes an enemy. It is not that. It's just like a teacher in a classroom who will come from outside and decide to teach your subject for you. So I think it's a system that needs gradual, that needs persuasions before it can be broken into. So gradually, I think this 6 months will bound be stopped. In Ghana, you realize before you enter into someone's leadership activity, you reason a bit. You realize, no, when I say this, is it not going to harm someone else? When I do this, is it not going to infringe upon someone's issues? So then you try to minimize yourself a bit. So I think gradually we will bound go through. Thank you. It's not a question, but a short submission.
Thank you so much, Richard. Evelyn, please.
Thank you very much. As always, a wonderful presentation. I'm going to take it from the very broad spectrum down based to the issue of women to women at the grassroots. And I just want to remind us all of an amazing presentation, I guess it was in 2024, on food for peace, that talked about how the pastoralist village and the pastoralists and the agriculturalists came together through food, the women sharing food and stories around food. And so I just wanted to, I know that it was a pilot project, but I wondered if that might begin to speak to bottom communication.
Yeah, thank you so much for reminding.
Evelyn.
Go ahead, Stella.
Yes. So, Evelyn, actually with that, I think I remember we had a presentation. I think you're the one who presented then. And I did a reflection on what I experienced in Liberia and the accounts of how some of the women in different communities came to work together. So they had what they called the sewing project. So women from, say, community A are tailors, women from community B needs to sew their clothes. So they will go to women from community A. So gradually they built that bond, that relationship, to a point where they were able to work together. Why? Because in taking the measurements of the dresses that they needed to make, the conversations ensued from there. So there is that aspect of touch, relationship, discussing the beauty of what we are trying to create. I'm trying to make a dress for you. So in doing that, I have to take your measurement. And in order to take your measurement, we Let's have a conversation, because you need to tell me what you like, what you don't like about, what you wouldn't want to happen to your dress. So through that, women actually came from the two different communities came to work together. And that was a mechanism for them to join forces in order to ensure peace in their different communities. So yes, it is possible.
Yeah, thank you so much. There are
Could
a few
I,
questions.
could I just ask for a clarification? You said the tailors, did they come together with the women who not just needed the dresses, but made the fabrics? I mean, did the
Yes.
women come with their own fabrics and they had made it, right? So was that from the production, they each had something to contribute, right?
Yes, they each had something to contribute. The tailors had fabrics. Some women will come with their own fabrics. Some will come to use the fabrics that the tailors had to have their dresses made. So that's how they built that relationship that eventually led to them working together to ensure that both communities had, peace. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. There are a few questions in chat, Stella, if you can look at them while we listen to Eda. You wanted to ask a question or make a comment, and then we go to Peter, and will be the last person for us today, Peter. Eda, please.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. I just want to make a comment. Thank you, Sister Stella, for addressing crucial issues that call on us, African scholars, to deeply reflect on how we can overcome the complicated situations that our continent finds itself in. I just finished an essay written by an Africanist, an Italian professor, and he is writing about history of African communication, and from his base in Mozambique. And he talks about how the history of colonialism and also the rise of the bourgeoisie impacts and affects everything that we do and makes it very messy. And he concludes his essay by saying that African studies researchers have to offer new reflections on how to deal with these issues in contemporary Africa. And I find your presentation today also challenging us to really reflect on this. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking, wow, it is our work, it's our responsibility as scholars, as practitioners of peace, but I don't know whether we have more responsibility than our corrupt leaders whose thinking is so twisted and gross that we cannot even trust them to do anything. What is the role of African scholarship? And as a scholar, I just feel very committed to always think about this. And as someone said, yeah, Mama is that classroom where we need to think about this all the time. Our politicians, God, I don't know. We can't even expect anything from them. And then the responsibility is on us. I'm grateful to be in this forum where I am able every Wednesday to think outside the box. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eda. Thank you so much. Let's go to Peter, and then Stella will find out.
Oh, thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. So clear. I have no questions about it, but I'm delighted to remember the presentation about the Fulani and the farmers and how Fulani leader burned a farmer's field, and it was not just one crop, it was a crop that takes generations to produce, and how the women had been meeting about cooking food together, and the leaders of the two communities' wives solved the problem by bringing in their relationship. The relational aspects of this are the crucial aspects. It's not about me or you, but it's about who we are as a relation. But I just wanted to remember this, my delight. I spent time with the Fulani people when I was 16 years old. And this is one of the things that shaped my life. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, so Stella, I thank you so much also on behalf of everybody, my own behalf, for your wonderful presentation. Maybe in 1 minute, if you can give us, some kind of hope for the future, especially in Africa. Thanks.
I think in as much as it is challenging, the situation we face in the continent is, at the end of the day, we need a collective reawakening, and we cannot disassociate ourselves from it. The little effort we put in stopping ourselves from bribing in order to get to the top of the ranks is an effort far enough to create change in our society. So as individuals, we understand, yes, it is challenging. Transformation will come definitely. We might not be around to see it, but then it begins with us. Because as Mesang said, yes, indeed, we are the beautiful ones already born. So let's do our part, even in the midst of the challenges, and hope for a better future, for a better Africa. Because at the end of the day, our dream is to see a better Africa. Let's be the change we want to be. And that is one of the reasons why, as a scholar practitioner, I decided to start my own initiative. How do I take the knowledge I have acquired in the classroom? How do I take the knowledge that I pour out on my papers and ensure I implement that into the communities? So through GAIP-Leadership, we are engaging communities. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. But we believe one step at a time, that change will come. But it can only begin with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. And all the best for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, George. Thank you.